Hey there. Last week I brought Reanimator to my local 7 Point Highlander weekly event, and what I learned there gave me really great inspiration for talking about metagames in the context of deck building. First of all, some quick definitions. The metagame in Magic's context just means what people are playing. It's generally used as a shorthand for the types of decks that show up at events, but it also means the variations on those deck lists. Let's take Ixalan Standard. Metagame data would tell you that two people are playing white-based token decks, but it would also include the fact that one of them has Settle the Wreckage in the sideboard and the other one doesn't. The most important thing to know when analysing data of any kind is what you need to know. What's important to you in a way that's more specific than winning the game. In my case, playing Reanimator, here are the things that I need to know. What ways can my opponents make it hard for me to win? How many of my opponent's decks naturally play those lines? How can I change my deck to stop myself from losing in these ways? And what do I lose to change my deck like that? What I found last week was that this deck has a sort of vulnerability curve. See, I'm investing most of my early plays into one single threat. Once it hits the play, I'm pretty happy because it'll either replace itself or trade up with removal. But right before that point, my opponent has a chance to break my combo and all of the cards that I've spent getting to that point. Counter Magic is the obvious way to snipe that weak spot, but Hand Attack can do a similar thing by removing my ability to actually combo and leaving me with a bunch of functionally dead cards in my hand until I'm able to find a replacement for the piece that they took. More importantly, Counter Magic is easier to play around since I can prepare with a bait spell or hold up my own counters, whereas Hand Attack can happen as early as turn 1, and especially when I'm on the draw, there's very little that I can do to stop it. There's also the case of Graveyard Hate, which almost every deck has access to in some capacity. The most egregious effect is Reanimate, which most black decks can happily run and absolutely violates my strategy by stealing my enormous bomb for just 1 mana, and after I've done all the work of setting it up. The good news is that most decks, beyond a few main deckable options, don't really have it until after sideboarding. The bad news is that the sideboard is where people put cards that deport you to the Shadow Realm. So it looks like before the sideboard, my worst matchups are black and blue-based mid-range decks, while almost every opponent will have some way to compromise my primary game plan after sideboarding. That is not a great start, but there are ways to prepare. My original list had counterspells and hand attack to fight back against opposing interaction, but how effective are they? Well, first of all, I was absolutely able to take wins I might not have otherwise got with Force of Will, Mental Misstep, and Daze. But there are also moments that I couldn't cast them effectively. There's also the fact that I can't get great density, since with a curve that cops out at just 2 cards that cost 3 mana, adding even a single mana to my combo turn is a substantial cost. The hand attack was great on the play as well, but trading Thought Seizers on the draw is really bad for me, since my deck's specific vulnerability to hand attack means I'm usually getting the worst end of the deal. But there is another solution to this vulnerability, one that I'd call a structural solution, to differentiate it from the direct solution of fighting back with my own interaction. And it hinges on the observation that the cards that are beating me are fundamentally 1-for-1 effects. They look a lot more like 2 or even 3-for-1s in the context of the matchup playing against my Reanimator deck, but they still only take 1 card. The simple solution is this: add cards which can find multiple pieces of the combo. Cards like Dig Through Time, Stock Up, or Limdul's Vault all only take up 1 slot in the hand, but functionally act as multiple combo pieces, which adds really crucial redundancy to the gameplay. Another direct solution is to add recursion. Having your reanimate countered is a lot less severe when you can buy it back next turn with a Snapcaster or a Regrowth. I like it less than the other solution, since it's still inherently card neutral, but it is a different way that I can fight back against this sort of problem. As for Graveyard Hate, there are again direct and structural solutions. I could fill the sideboard with Assassin's Trophies, and that would help, or I could abandon the Graveyard plan in favour of leaning into Oath of Druids more. Whatever I choose, it will have to rely pretty heavily on the sideboard in order to respond effectively to my opponent's changes for Game 2 while preserving my Game 1 win rate, which is a pretty major strength of Reanimator and fast combo in general. So I have answers to most of my starting questions, but before I make any changes, there's one important thing to ask. Does changing my deck make it better? That might sound stupid, but you have to consider, if my deck is already good at beating certain decks, and I'm tuning it to beat cards that those decks aren't playing, how much does it change those matchups? It's possible that it's not much at all, and my strategy just dominates regardless of my deck's specific composition. But most good decks will have cards I need to beat, and if I'm tuning my deck in such a way that I sacrifice my ability to beat those cards, then I might lose my edge in matchups I used to win. That can be fine, as long as I'm gaining enough ground against the field to make it back up. In this case, the Grixis matchup is nigh unwinnable with an all-in Reanimator game plan. A keepable Grixis hand consists of 1 threat, 2 lands, and 4 cards which can dismantle my entire strategy. But by changing my angle, I could pivot to a more mid-rangey deck that has a larger top end, which would give me a much better game against them. Considering that the matchups that I had on lock already were things like Red-White Legends, I still feel very favoured by my enormous lifelinkers. On the other hand, I could pivot all the way through to Oath Control, playing a long interactive game where I again have the much larger top end. This makes my game, I think, the best against Grixis, but it does significantly compromise my ability to beat fast aggressive decks like Legends or Eclipse, although it does give me stronger game against Eldrazi, so it's still a consideration. So, what am I changing for this week? Nothing. I'll be bringing the exact same deck that I brought last week, with the real cards instead of substitutions. It's not just a bout of pettiness. I want to really understand everything about how this specific build of Reanimator plays, how I struggle, and how my opponents will try to bring me down. That experience will inform the ways that I choose to build the deck for the coming weeks. So, let's jam. Had a rough start to this week, dropping a quick 0-2 to Grixis and losing a very tight 1-2 to a mud list. I then got the bye in round 3, which did leave me with the opportunity to conquer my demons, taking a reverse 2-1 against Grixis in the 4th round. The biggest repeated mistake that I made on the night was the stock that I placed on Worldly Tutor in my opening 7. For some reason I can't explain, I placed a lot of value on Metamorphosis Fanatic as a early threat, but it really doesn't fill that role in the deck. It doesn't replace or protect itself unless there's already something in my bin, and that fixation on that card as an early threat really led me to keeping some hands that I shouldn't have been keeping. And mulligans are already something that I really needed to focus on. Round 2 was the most heartbreaking match I might have ever played of 7-Point Highlander. I had them down to 1 after hitting them with Coma and the 4 coils. They'd gained some life off of an Inventor's Fair. That also left me on 1, and they were able to resurrect their Scrawling Crawler in my end step for lethal. I also got some great value off of a turn 2 Oath on game 3, but that wasn't enough since their Ensnaring Bridge was able to stop me from attacking meaningfully. I made a huge blunder in this game, mistiming my Into the Floodmoor. Since I'd already fixated on the turn that I wanted to use it, I didn't pay attention to their Tangle Wire and Winter Orb that locked me out of attacking on the turn that I cast the Into the Floodmoor, and I couldn't deal damage for the rest of the game. These mistakes are really basic, and I need to get them out of my system. I'm fixating on game plans and not adjusting to changes in the game state before going through with them. This was kind of hidden with Goblins, where I only really had one viable game plan at any given moment, but switching to Reanimator has really exposed it. To be honest, it's a little embarrassing, but I'm really actually quite glad to have been able to find and identify such a crucial weakness in the way that I play the game. And that'll give me opportunities to make really big improvement. If I can just focus on what's going on and make those moment to moment decisions based on the current game state, not on what I was planning to do, I think I'll gain a lot of points. I'll probably notice a lot of other mistakes, especially in my early sequencing, but good. I'll be able to fix them. As for the deck, it's not like it didn't do powerful things. I cast a turn 1 Oath of Druids, I shallow graved a turn 2 Atraxa, I even resolved Show and Tell against Grixis after a multiple. Hey, sometimes they just don't have it. But I also felt those same weaknesses as last week. My keep in round 1, game 1 on the play had Oath of Druids, Show and Tell, and Archon of Cruelty. I got the Oath Thought Seized and the Show and Tell Spell Pierced, and I got thrashed. Moreover, I found myself in a lot of positions where I knew my opponent could interact with me, and I just had to pray that they wouldn't. Fortunately, this tells me a lot about what I want the deck to be able to do, which should help me to refine it into a version that I'm actually really happy with. Mainly, I want to be more flexible, which will likely involve cutting the Oath plan in favor of adding more powerful creatures. Adding cheaper creatures ironically increases the curve, which will make the deck less explosive, but it will let me fit in more powerful card selection effects. One of the biggest pressure points when playing was figuring out how to do everything I needed with just the mana available over the first 2 to 3 turns. So hopefully this will actually alleviate a lot of strain on the gameplay. That said, more options always means more opportunities to misplay, so I'm going to need to pay a lot more attention if I want to maximize my performance with that build. I'll be happy to bring you a comprehensive list of all of the mistakes I make next week, so until then, good luck, have fun, and may the best wizard win.